Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So this is going to be my first cosplay how-to video, and it's going to be on how I made my Gandalf, the white staff. So first thing I did was I patterned out the kind of outside of the top part of the staff, and then I cut it out. And then I decided to use EVA foam instead because it's thicker. I don't know what I was thinking about using craft foam. Then I traced it out onto the EVA foam, and then I cut it out with my X-Acto knife. Then when I was done cutting the pieces, I popped them all out of the EVA foam. So after I had all my pieces, the next step was to pattern out the inside of the top staff. It was kind of like those little squiggly lines there. So that's what I was making. And I used the pattern for the outside to kind of get the proportions right for the inside pattern. So this was the completed pattern for the rest of the staff. So after I finished cutting out the pattern, I laid it on top of the outside pattern to see how it would lay, and I really liked how it looked. So I then took the pattern and I put it on the craft foam. I took some pins to pin it down because the pattern was quite flimsy and it would have went everywhere if I would have, like, during my tracing. So I pinned it down and I traced it onto the craft foam. So this is what it looked like when I had it all traced out. I had 2 more to do. And then it was time to cut 3 of these babies out of the craft foam. So for this part, I like to call this the Warbler sandwich method. So when you put a piece of craft foam in between 2 pieces of Warbler and you heat it up. So then the craft foam isn't flimsy, and for those of you who don't know, when you heat Warbler up, it kind of becomes, it's bendable, moldable, and when it cools down, it becomes really hard. So I did the sandwich method with all 3 of the pieces and cut it out with the little X-Acto knife there again, and you have to keep heating it up as you go to make it easier to cut. You can't really cut it when it's super hard. I mean, you can, but it'll just cost you more work. So this is what they looked like when they were all finished and when I cut them all out of the Warbler. So then I took my EVA foam pieces and I took them to the belt sander. I didn't film this part because it's way too cold in my garage, and when you sand the EVA foam it makes a huge mess, so I like to do it outside. And it gives it a much nicer look. I then heat sealed the EVA foam. It just seals the foam, and it also, the heat helps take the little bits and pieces off of the edges. Then I took the pieces and put them together. I needed to see where the Warbler piece would lie on the EVA foam, and I just needed to position it. And then I took my glue gun and I started to glue the outside pieces together. So that's what it looked like on the inside when I glued it. This is me testing the other piece. I always like to test the pieces before I glue them to see how they're going to lie. So then I started to glue it again. So I started to glue on the warble pieces. I glued them at all 4 corners, right there where I was pointing. And then at the top there where it kind of connects to the thing. And I'm an over gluer. I'm always so scared that things are gonna fall apart, so I just glue and glue and glue. Happy gluer. So after I glued the first one, I liked where it was positioned, so I was testing out where the other ones would be sitting. And I measured it. I think it was 1.5 inches from the bottom, so there would be like that little hole. So I heat all the pieces up before I put them on, because warble is also very sticky, so it can stick really well, and I needed to bend it in shape to make the roundness of the top of the staff there. So I went out and bought a broomstick handle and I glued the whole piece just with hot glue onto the handle. So I left the third part open in case I needed to get in there. Then I had the bright idea of actually making my staff light up. So I bought some LEDs off Amazon. I'll show you them later. And I took a piece of EVA foam and I glued it in the middle of the broomstick and the staff so the LEDs could sit right in there. And then I just realized I didn't really need in there anymore, so I glued the third piece on. There was enough room for me to get in the middle if I needed to with that 1.5 inch space at the bottom. So then I heated up the top of the warbler pieces to sculpt them better into that roundness that the staff has. So I have this awesome material called foam clay, and it's a moldable foam. It's kind of like Play-Doh, and then when it hardens, it takes like 24 hours to dry, it turns into foam. So I used this to put in all of my seams. So all the 3 sides there had obviously seams, and I needed to seal them up. So I took the foam clay and I put it in all the seams. After 24 hours it dried, and I also sculpted the bottom pieces of the staff there that go along the handle. And then it was time for sanding. So I think this was a 60 grit sandpaper, and I started sanding the edges to blend the clay foam into the original foam. I then took some quick seal and I used it to fill in there's some little cracks and crevices in places. And because I couldn't sand the edges perfectly from the bottom little triangle pieces to the top pieces, I also filled them in there to make that look a little better. So after the top piece was done, it was time to prime. So I used this Rust-Oleum white primer to start the first layer of covering the staff. After I'm done probably 1 coat of primer, I will use this paint and primer and run that over maybe 2 coats. And then the painting should be complete. So this is what it looked like after it dried. I didn't really like the look of the foam clay after I sculpted it. I'm not a great sculptor. So I decided to make it out of EVA foam instead because I find I'm better at sanding that. So I had to make a pattern and rip off all of these little pieces here. So I then took some masking tape and I made a pattern for the bottom pieces. So I made sure they all fit on each side, and then I went to the garage again and I took the belt sander to the sides. So this is what they looked like after I finished sanding the edges. And my nails aren't dirty, that's just paint. I then had to heat seal them again to get them all cleaned up. They always look so smooth when you're done heat sealing them. I love that effect. So I had to sand where the primer was. It was raised where I took the little pieces off. So I did want to add another layer of paint, so I took some titanium white and I just covered the top of the staff and just a little bit down the broom. So I didn't show this, but I took some more quick seal and I sealed the seams a little more. Still not the best, but I mean, you can't really see them, so woohoo! Then it was time to make it glow. So this is my first time working with LEDs, and these are the little guys I got off Amazon. Just battery powered there. Super simple to use, and they're very small. So I had to figure out a way to make it work with me just reaching in the tiny little spots to get the LEDs in kind of together and glue them in there. The top was too small for me to stick the glue gun in, so I had to improvise and use this little tool I had. It's just kind of like a pointy sculpting type thing, and that was just perfect just to dab glue on the LEDs to get them in there. Then I found it easier to glue when they were turned on, so I just left them on while I glued them.